We'll start a new drawing to do this. We'll name it Tech because we're going to be creating a simple technical illustration using the drawing basics from this video. We'll be making a drawing of a hypothetical system that does some kind of text processing. We'll start by seeing a few ways we can attach text to a shape. As with other drawings we have done, we start by creating a new layer and then make sure that it is selected. Next, add a rounded corner rectangle as a shape. Depending on what you have done last, you might have to reset the parameters on the shape toolbar. Put the rectangle somewhere on the left-hand side of the drawing. You can move the rectangle while you are drawing by pressing down on the spacebar, and of course continue to hold the mouse button down. The rectangle represents what we'll call the current process. Keep in mind this is just an example and we're making things up as we go along. We know how to add freestanding text, so let's do that to label this rectangle. Somewhere above the rectangle, not too close to it, add the text current process. Select the horizontal text tool. You may have to reset the settings in the text panel. Add the text. It's not placed where we want it. It should be centered a bit above the rectangle. Use the Move tool to approximately place it. It's probably not properly centered now. We need to do a transformation to fix that. Fly out the Layers panel if need be. Select both the rounded rectangle layer and the current process layer. To do this, click on the rounded rectangle layer, then while holding down the Control key, click on the current process layer. Make sure that the Move tool is selected and notice that the tool panel at the top now has lit up all the alignment controls. Select the Align Horizontal Centers control. Now our text is centered on the rectangle and placed about where we want it, but the overall drawing would look better if the rectangle and its label was moved a bit higher. Use the Move tool to move the rectangle and label a bit higher. You can do that by selecting the Move tool and then click on and drag the rectangle. That didn't give us the result we wanted. The rectangle moved, but the label did not. Just undo that by pressing Ctrl-Z. We really don't have any intention of current process moving independently of the rounded rectangle labels, so what we need to do is to group the layers that they are on together. To do that, select both the rounded rectangle layer and the current process layer, then type Ctrl-G. Notice that the current process and rounded rectangle have been replaced by a Group 1 entry in the Layers panel. They're still there though, as we will see shortly. Group 1 is highlighted, meaning it is selected, and you can see a bounding box around both the current process and rounded rectangle in the drawing. Now try moving the rectangle again using the Move tool. The current process and rounded rectangle move together because we are moving the group that they are in. In the Layers panel is a little arrowhead pointing at a folder icon for Group 1. That's called a twirler. Click on it and you will see the layers that make up Group 1 twirl out. Click on the rounded rectangle in the Layers panel. Now just the rounded rectangle is selected. Use the Move tool to move the rounded rectangle. Notice that both current process and rounded rectangle moved together and that the selection in the Layers panel changed from the rounded rectangle layer to the Group 1 layer. The reason for this is that the auto select in the Move panel is set to Group. That means that if you click on something that is in a group, the group that it is a member of will be selected, not just that shape or text. If you change Auto Select from Group to Layer and then click on the rectangle and move it, you will see the behavior we got the first time we tried to move the rectangle. That's because with Auto Select set to Layer, a click will select the layer, not the group that contains it. Use Ctrl-Z to undo that move so that things look nice again. In Photoshop, there is no direct context of text and a shape being connected to each other. To get that effect, you have to group the layers for the shape and text together, or as we'll see later in the course, link the layers. There is an alternate way to add text so that it aligns with the shape more consistently. Let's add another rectangle for a secondary process. First, select the background layer. This is important, but for simplicity, we'll defer the reasons why till later in the layers part of this course. Now select the rectangle tool and add another rectangle about the same size as the first. It's not important that it be exactly the same size. You probably would like it to be the same size, but the techniques for consistency and repeatability with minimal effort are discussed in later parts of this course. For now, we are just focused on drawing basics. Once you are done drawing that rectangle, select the Move tool. This will add grab handles to the rectangle. If the grab handles are not there, check the Show Transform controls. One of the things the grab handles do is to mark the center of the rectangle. So we can keep track of where the middle is. Pull a guideline onto the horizontal middle handle. Now select the text tool. If centered text is not selected, select it now. Float the cursor just above the rectangle we just made and let it snap to the guideline. Notice that the cursor changes so that it has a wiggly line in it. If you see a dashed circle in the cursor, just move it up a bit until you see the wiggly line. Click and type in secondary process. It is nicely centered, but the Y, and in fact almost any letter with a descender in it, is touching the boundary of the rectangle. Before we click the check mark to set that text, let's fix it up. There are quite a few things you can control about text. We're going to use one of them, the baseline shift. We'll use that to move the text a bit higher. You access the character menu from the icon near the right end of the text panel. First, select all of the text by pressing Ctrl-A, then adjust the baseline shift to be 10 points. Click the check mark to set the text. Now we have a nicely centered and spaced label. There's a gotcha here. It might look like, because of the process we went through to add the label, that the text is somehow attached to the rectangle. In a lot of other drawing editors, it would be. Select the Move tool and move the rectangle we just added. Notice that the text remains in place. Even though it seems like we attached the text to the boundary of the rectangle, we didn't. That was just used as a guide for laying out the text. Use Ctrl-Z to put things back the way things were. To make that text and the rectangle a single component, the layers still have to be grouped. This is a system that processes text, so let's add a rectangle with text in it. Earlier we saw that the rectangle was just a shape path that was filled and stroked. The secondary process label we just added used that shape path as a guide for the text we typed in. You can also use that shape path as a boundary and fill it with text. The text cursor with the wiggle line on it we saw in the previous example indicated that the shape path was being used as a guide for the text. A text cursor with a dashed circle in it indicates that the shape path will be used as a boundary that will be filled with text. So let's add a rectangle and use its shape path as a boundary for text. Next, select the text tool and make sure left alignment is selected. Move the cursor over the inside of the rectangle. You will see the cursor change, so now it has a dashed circle icon in it. Click the mouse and then you can type text. When we did the label before, we typed in the text, but you can also use Ctrl-V to paste text in from the clipboard, and that's what we'll do now. However, the text is running over the border. Select all of the text and open the character panel. There is a 5-point baseline shift that is pushing the text up into the border. If we change that to -5 points, it will look a lot better. We had to fool around with the text settings when we did the secondary process label, and now again with this text fill. We've done a lot of other made-by-hand operations too. That's a lot of busy work. Photoshop supports saving and reusing settings for characters, paragraphs, and most other things. In practice, you would have one set of saved character settings you would use for labels on rectangles, and another for text used to fill a rectangle. Reusing settings like this can save a lot of time and effort. Later in this course, we will see how to do this. There is still a bit of an issue with the text that fills this rectangle. Notice how the first line is indented a little. That's because when text is used to fill a shape path, it quite literally fills the path it's given. The rounded corner on the rectangle doesn't leave quite enough space for the beginning of the first line to align with the second. There are a number of ways we could fix this, and we'll cover those later in this course when we dig deeper into shapes and text. One last thing. The fill text, just like the label text we did before, is not really connected to the rectangle. So to keep the text and rectangle together, we must group them. Next, to tidy things up a bit, we should make a rectangle that holds all the other rectangles. So far, we have been using layers in Photoshop because each shape or piece of text goes onto its own layer. Now, however, we want to make sure that the rectangle we use to tie everything together is underneath of all the other rectangles. When you add a new shape to a drawing, the layer for it is added above whatever layer is currently selected. So select the background layer and then add a big rectangle to hold everything else. The rectangle is under all the others because it is lower in the Layers panel than all the other rectangles. Now our rectangles are nicely boxed in, but we should add a divider between the processors and the text. We can do this using a vertical line. However, we want to be sure that line is on top of the big rectangle we just drew, so select the layer for the big rectangle, then add a layer. The new layer is now on top of the big rectangle. Now select the Line tool. We saw earlier that the Line tool is just an alternate way to draw a rectangle. So we want to turn off the stroke and just use the fill. We need to set the fill to be the same color as the border we are using on the rectangles. That's H85, S56, B53. Now we can draw the line from the top to the bottom of the big rectangle. Hold down the Shift key while dragging the line out to keep it perfectly vertical. We have created a simple block diagram of our text processing system. Now, it isn't all that wonderful a technical drawing, but the purpose in making it was just to show the drawing basics of the vector and text capabilities of Photoshop. Let's do a quick review of what they are. Photoshop, besides being a bitmap editor, is also a vector-based drawing editor. You use shapes to create drawing elements, figures, pieces of your drawing, whatever you want to call them. A shape consists of a path, a stroke, and a fill. A shape path is a line that is stroked with a color and filled with a color. Many of the properties of the shape are parametric, such as color and width of stroke. Parametric means they can be edited after the shape has been drawn to change what the shape looks like. Text can be added any place in the drawing. Most of its properties are parametric too, so for example, the size of the font can be changed after it has been drawn. The text can also be stretched uniformly or non-uniformly. Text can also be made to follow or fill a shape. Photoshop has layers. Layers are used as they are in other drawing programs to allow one piece of a drawing to be drawn on top of another. The Layers panel shows the order in which the layers will be drawn. The layers that are lower in the panels are drawn underneath of the layers above them. However, Photoshop treats layers a bit differently than other drawing programs. Photoshop has different kinds of layers. A shape layer can only have shapes on it. A text layer can only have a single piece of text on it. The layer also holds some of the properties of the things that are drawn on it. For example, changing the color of a stroke changes the color of all the strokes on that layer. As a result, typically each layer in Photoshop contains just a single shape or a single piece of text. A drawing element cannot be attached to another drawing element. For example, a text label cannot be attached to a shape, as it is possible in many other drawing editors. You get the effect of attaching one drawing element to another by grouping together the layers they are drawn on. In this video, we've really just covered the basics, and in the process, a lot of things were handmade. Later videos in this course will extend the basics we've seen here and show how presets and styles are used to minimize making things by hand each time we need them.